Alright, I'm going to read When Souls Collide. This is book 1 in the Agency series, and I'm going to read the whole novel. I'm going to have to upload it in probably several different videos. But I want to give you an idea of my writing style and to see if I can get you hooked on my series. So book 1, the Agency series, When Souls Collide. This is about Maddie Edwards. She's a loving mother, and she has a tight bond with her very young son, Toby. And after Maddie's husband is murdered at work, little Toby vows to take care of his mother forever. Young Maddie is desperate to support herself and her little boy, and she acquires a position at the temp agency, which is called the Agency. But the work is not exactly what she is expecting, and neither was the Agency. Maddie soon discovers that she is suited for different types of assignments that are given to her, very clandestine tasks, deep within the government and corporate life. Tasks also gives her an outlet for the rage that she holds for her husband's murder. So in some ways, Maddie kind of becomes two different people. But when Maddie's son grows up and graduates from college, he becomes an FBI agent. And his first assignment is to track down the killer of a U.S. senator. Unfortunately, what he doesn't realize is that that was one of Mommy's assignments. Alright, so The Agency, When Souls Collide, is a fascinating novel of intrigue and romance and a frightening description of powerful, cynical manipulators of the political world, yet in the end, it is a testament to strength and love. So please enjoy The Agency, When Souls Collide, Book 1. Chapter 1. She could feel the little hand in hers, and it was so very small and soft. When she rubbed the tiny fingers, she sensed the innocence. Her head hung low, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she stood silently staring into the flowers. An ever so slight breeze crossed her face and lifted her hair. It felt good, if only for a few seconds. Her face was hot and flushed from the continuous waves of never-ending tears, and suddenly she remembered where she was and why. Never had she felt such sadness, such loss, such loneliness. She would not believe this was happening, not to her, not here, not now. The reality was just too much to accept. Every breath was painful and empty, and her chest rumbled, holding back more tears. She wanted to run, scream, hide, go, and do anything but be here. She looked down through tear-soaked eyes at the little man standing next to her. She blinked, and more tears rolled down each cheek as new ones took their place. Only a few feet high and a few years old, this little boy was now the man of the house. He stood strong next to his mother, proudly wearing his new suit. It made him itch, but he would be brave for her and not move. His grandmother had told him he had to be strong, and he would not let his mother down, not now, not ever. He knew she needed him, and he had to take care of her, so he stood there by his mother for what seemed like an eternity. Her husband lay only a few feet away in a box covered with beautiful flowers. They smelled so sweet, but represented such sadness and pain. The petals and leaves flickered in the wind and fell slowly to the ground. With that one breeze, so many wonderful memories were gone, so many hopes and dreams never to be fulfilled, so many plans together, their future not gone forever. Gone in only a few brief seconds, 1 minute a wife, the next a widow. Wife white, widow black. She heard the sound of mowers in the distance, and the smell of newly cut grass was so strong that the odor actually stung her eyes and made them tear even more. She had no idea how long she had been standing there, just staring. It had been early morning when the pastor was talking and the sun was shining strongly behind her. But now the sun was above her. How long had it been? An hour? A day? No, it had been a lifetime. His lifetime. She looked around and was confused. Her mind was thinking about so many things. Where was everyone? Where did they all go? What was she to do now? Should she leave? Should she stay? Should she go home? What home? There was no home anymore, not without him there too. What was she supposed to do? There was no one here to tell her. The hurt, it was deep inside. Should she turn and leave him here alone? Money, what about money? She'd never worked a day in her life. The house, what if something went wrong at the house? Who would fix it? Her head was spinning. Every thought, every feeling was coming in waves. Fear, hate, concern, worry. Every emotion imaginable was swirling around inside her already frail little body. Her life, her safe, warm life, was gone. She was falling. No, wait, she was still standing, but she was also falling down a deep, dark hole, and there was nothing to grab onto, nothing. "Somebody tell me what to do," she whispered, almost inaudible. "Mommy?" little Toby mumbled. She could not respond. How do you just walk away and leave someone you loved so dearly in such a cold, awful place? It was 85 degrees standing there in the sun, but to her it felt like 85 below. Her bones were frozen, and she ached terribly. Who would she sleep next to now? Who would she talk to? Who would take care of her? Sex? What about sex? The questions just kept coming and wouldn't stop. She remembered the flowers in her left hand. With every ounce of her remaining strength, she slowly raised her arm to place the flowers on top of the coffin. When the bottom of her arm brushed the casket, something changed inside of her, a little something. She was not sure what it was at first. It was ever so slight, only a small tingling sensation, but it was something, a deep, dark feeling, and she did not understand what it was. She changed that day, and she would never be the same. It was a very subtle change, but a very strong one. It occurred from deep within. It was hate, she felt, a deep-rooted hate for the man who had killed her husband. Revenge. It was the wanting of revenge that changed her forever that day. "Oh, God, I'm going to be sick," she thought. "I can't do this. This can't be happening to me." She turned and walked toward the limousine with a little Toby in tow. The driver was holding the car door open, waiting just for them. She put one foot in front of the other, knowing that at any moment they would give away. The vomit was rising in her throat and her chest ached. The shaking was uncontrollable now, but she had to hold on to that precious little hand. She had to. It was all she had left. She reached the car, and as the driver lifted the little boy into his seat, it hit her. The tears, the screams, "Oh, dear God, no!" Those uncontrollable screams. She fell to the ground and cried. Her body was shaking and aching from the deep agony that was dominating her mind, body, and soul. The little boy watched his mother lose all that was left of her reality that day from his seat inside the hot car. Chapter 2. "Miss Young, Mr. Worley will see you now. Please hand him your application when you enter." The old woman walked away, expecting the young woman to follow. Miss Young thought, as she followed the aging woman, "that no one ever goes after your ass, you cold thing." She switched her hips back and forth to mimic the old woman. As she walked, she thought to herself, "Application, indeed. It's only good for one thing, starting fires. Not 1 ounce of truth on that damn piece of paper." The secretary had a name, but hadn't felt it necessary to share it. With all the applicants coming and going, why? Only one would stay, and introductions could and would be done then. But she knew this one had the job. She was just too pretty. Long, dark, wavy brown hair, with matching eyes that were framed with the most beautiful eyebrows she'd ever seen. She wore a perfect light gray suit that complemented her figure. She was reserved, but not too reserved, and her smile lit up her face. Beautiful, the old woman thought, and she knew Mr. Worley would like her and want her the moment he saw her. Yep, she would be a keeper, all right. Mr. Worley, Miss Young. The old woman held the huge sculptured door open to allow the young lady into the room. And what a room! It was large, with dark wood bookcases along most of the walls. 4 huge glass chandeliers hung from the sculptured ceilings, which were at least 15 feet high. Several beautiful oriental rugs covered the freshly hand-waxed wooden floor. The room smelt faintly of pipe tobacco, and not cheap tobacco either. There was money here, and a lot of it. A shame, she thought. This is a beautiful room. Please do come in, Miss Young, and have a seat over here. He motioned her to the area of the room with a couch against the wall and 2 chairs in front, with a glass coffee table between them. A hand-carved copper vase was filled with a fresh bouquet of summer flowers, and the delightful scent added a vibrant element to this otherwise dark and ominous room. Maddie took a seat in the chair where her back was to Mr. Worley. He frowned as her beauty was removed from his sight. To get his view back, Mr. Worley took a seat on the couch and smiled. So may I have your application, please, and let's give it a quick once-over, shall we? Call me Bill, okay? He reached for her application and enjoyed the view. She handed it to him and smiled. Not a word would she speak during this interview. Not one word. I normally do not employ temporary help, he continued, but you came highly recommended by a friend of mine, so I thought I'd give it a try. Now, you do realize this position could become permanent, correct? His eyes were beaming at her, but she only nodded in agreement and smiled. Mr. Worley was in his 50s, and about the same amount of pounds overweight. He was actually somewhat distinguished-looking. He had gray hair and a neatly trimmed gray beard and mustache. He wore an expensive suit, but the jacket hung on the coat rack by the door. His yellow suspenders matched his tie and the kerchief in his jacket. He carried himself as any wealthy man would. By his mannerisms and the way he spoke, Madison, or Maddie as her friends called her, could tell he was educated. The frames on the wall gave her additional cues. A Harvard School of Law diploma and several others she couldn't quite make out hung behind his desk between the 2 huge windows that were so neatly draped in dark green velvet. His desk was of dark mahogany, very elegant. All his accessories matched perfectly. On the shelves around the room were books, statues, and family pictures. Obviously, a woman's touch was here. On the wall directly in front of Maddie hung a painting of a beautiful young woman with a little baby. It must be Mrs. Bill in her younger days, Maddie thought. A shame. Then she remembered the reason she was here, and her anger and revulsion rose again. She wondered what he looked like with no clothes on, and almost giggled, but kept it back. He held her resume in his hand and read it as though it was the best reading material he had ever seen. "I'll bet you're terrible in bed," Maddie yelled to herself. "Did you really enjoy wiping all those people out, you evil son of a bitch?" She hated him. She loathed him, even though she was just meeting him for the first time. "Well," he began, "your typing skills are quite impressive, young lady. Let me say that I do understand how degrading a typing test can be, and I do apologize, but it's necessary. We've had ladies who say they type 100 words a minute and then they can't even turn on the computer. You do understand the position I'm in, don't you?" He smiled at her again. She could tell he approved of her immediately, and that the job was hers for the taking. Again Maddie only nodded. "Oh, I do understand the position you're in," she thought as she smiled and considered his brief future. She would accomplish what she came here for, revenge for the innocent people he had helped to kill and mutilate several months ago. He stood and walked over to the window as though deep in thought. Well, as you know, once you become a permanent employee, the salary for the position is $45,000 a year with full benefits. You'll have your own office, of course. When can you start? Immediately, I do hope. He turned to face the beauty sitting in the chair only a few feet away. You're quite the talented one, I'm sure. And there was that damn smile again, with the most sickening wink she had ever been subjected to. She smiled back, thinking, what an asshole. I presume Monday would be good? He grinned as he approached her with a slight dance in his stride, tugging at the waist of his pants. He held out his hand to offer a shake of approval, and once again Maddie smiled back, but she ignored the outreached hand. He cleared his throat and awkwardly walked to his desk, then turned and admired the pretty lady sitting in his office. The back of Maddie's chair was facing Mr. Worley's desk. She reached over the chair for her purse with her left hand, and as she did, the other slipped into her right pocket for a little box with adhesive on one side. She crossed her legs, which exposed her right leg from the knee down. Her suit skirt gave her the ability to do what she had to do, to pique this man's interest. He never noticed her right hand because he was too busy watching her legs move. Her right shoe slipped off, deliberately, of course, and Mr. Worley enjoyed every minute of this seductive show, which had been rehearsed especially for him. To him, Miss Young had the prettiest, sexiest, slender legs he'd ever had the pleasure to goggle over, and her naked foot was almost more than he could tolerate without demanding more. She glanced around the chair and smiled while slipping on her shoe with her free hand. He adjusted his pants again. Since the chair didn't face the desk, he could not see what her right hand was busily doing. But her left hand was stroking her calf, and oh, how he was enjoying the view! Maddie was pleased with the layout of the office. It made her work much easier. I believe you will be very happy here, Miss Young, he declared as he dialed the phone, grinning from ear to ear. Personnel? Yes, this is Mr. Worley. I'm sending Miss Young down. I want her to start on Monday. Yes, I said Monday. Is there a problem with that? No. I didn't think there would be. Now remember, she'll be working through the temporary agency for about 16 weeks or so. Yes, I have it all here, and we'll send it down with her. Okay, thank you. He hung up, never taking his eyes off the beauty for a moment. Oh, how he would have fun with this one. What Mr. Worley didn't see was Miss Young taking a small box from her pocket and placing it under her chair. She pressed it firmly in place and then let it go. She kept her hand there for a couple of seconds to make sure it didn't fall. When she was sure it was safe and secure, she stood, walked over to Mr. Worley, and held out her hand. He took it in both of his and once again congratulated her, never taking his eyes off her face and body. She was a beautiful woman. Miss Young smiled and blushed a little. It took some practice, but blushing on cue was easy once you got the hang of it. The secretary, having been buzzed, entered the room to escort Miss Young to the elevators. Maddie smiled one last time at Mr. Worley, and as she turned to leave, she thought, "You'll never know what hit you, you dumb son of a bitch." With that, she was gone. She never spoke a word. Chapter 3. Maddie was in her husband's arms. He was kissing her, and she felt safe and warm. She was so very happy. She could smell him, touch him, taste him. "I love you, Jake," she whispered. "But what's that awful noise?" She jerked awake and sat up. It was only the alarm, she thought. Damn that alarm. She reached over and hit the off button. Then she turned and looked at the empty pillow next to hers. "Oh, God," she sobbed. "It was so real." Maddie cried. She cried hard. It still hurt so much. She heard the sounds from the other room and realized Toby must be watching television. Ever since he figured out how to use the remote, he turned on the morning cartoons as soon as he awoke, and today was no exception. She wiped her eyes on her sheets and got out of bed. She took in a deep breath and realized that the crying did her no good. No good at all. I can do this, she told herself aloud. I can. Toby, she called, what are you doing? She walked into the kitchen wearing only a t-shirt. Of course it was one of Jake's. If she couldn't have him, she could at least wear his clothes. Everyone wanted her to get rid of his things immediately after his untimely death, but she wouldn't hear of it. Jake's mother, Martha, was the worst culprit. It'll only hurt more if you keep everything as it is, Maddie. You really should let me clean out his closet and drawers. I'm begging you. It'll be easier on you and Toby. Maddie couldn't wait for Martha to go back to Idaho. Mom, no, I'm just not ready yet. Please, leave things alone as they are. Well, that was that. And with their hurt feelings and tears tucked away in a dark corner of their emotional existence, Maddie's parents-in-laws were gone. Toby still visited his relatives in Idaho every summer for a few weeks, and Maddie still talked to Jake's mother once a month. But things were just never the same. Toby looked so much like his daddy, and sometimes looking at him was so painful for Maddie. Sandy hair, green eyes, and the sweetest smile ever, and the freckles. Both Jake and Toby had hundreds of them. Jake had hated his freckles, but Maddie loved them. She'd play connect the dots all over his body, and depending on her mood and what outcome she wanted, she'd connect them in different ways and places. What fun they had, and how much they loved each other. Maddie missed and wanted Jake back. Well, big boy, she said to Toby, let's get going. Mommy has to go to work today, she said as she poured his cereal into a bowl. Come on now, hurry. You worked yesterday, we play today. Toby had both his hands on his hips and was standing firmly in the kitchen doorway. He was really angry. Maddie smiled and picked the little one up and put him in his chair. I love you, you silly. Now eat. Box, Mommy, box. Oh, all right, but eat, okay? I'm going to be late for my last day, and you wouldn't want that. Okay, Mommy, I love you. I love you too, Toby. She looked into those beautiful eyes and wanted to play connect the dots with Jake so very much. God, how it hurt, and how she missed him. Maddie stood on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, staring up at the tall buildings. Glad I don't have to work in one of these every day for the rest of my life, she thought. She entered the building and walked to the elevators, where she was greeted every morning by the same doorman. Well, hello, Martha, the doorman smiled. Good morning, Jonathan, Maddie smiled back. Sometimes it was hard to remember which name she was pretending to use, so she tried to use the same one as much as possible, but she'd been counseled against that. Use different names every time, her trainer had told her. Too dangerous otherwise. Well, Maddie didn't think that this doorman was very dangerous. After all, he'd worked here since the building was built over 20 years ago. She loved this old building and would miss it. Oh, I almost forgot, Jonathan. Here's a little something for you. I'll miss you. She handed him a small box of chocolate cigars. Why, thank you, miss. I do hope your job in California works out for you. He smiled and winked. Maddie stepped into the elevator and pushed for the 17th floor. She smiled as Jonathan took a sip of her coffee as the doors closed. As the elevators hummed, she thought about her dream earlier that morning. She could still smell and taste her husband. She wondered how he would have felt about all of this, but she had to support their son somehow. Yes, there had been insurance, but not really enough. Is there ever really enough? She removed her key and got ready to exit the elevator, balancing her coffee and shoulder bag. As the doors opened, she thought of Jake again. I've got to stop this, or I'll never get this thing done. She giggled to herself. She walked down the hall and inserted the key. The door opened, and she blinked as the sunlight hit her eyes. The room was empty except for a single chair by the window with a box nearby on the floor. The sunlight hitting the floor sparkled as the dust danced furiously in the magical clouds of air that swirled to its own tune that she could not hear. It gave the room an unnatural, dull yellow glow. Once the door was closed and locked, she walked to the window and sat in the chair. The room was stuffy and smelled of aged dust. She reached into the box and took out the binoculars. She adjusted the view and watched. With her free hand, she reached into the box and removed a small cellular phone. Across the street and down one building, Maddie could see Mr. Worley at his window, drinking his morning coffee while watching the path of heavy traffic below. "Very predictable, Mr. Worley, which is not a good thing," Maddie whispered. She continued to watch as she slowly turned away from the window. That was when she dialed a number on the cellular phone. Mr. Worley never knew what hit him. The explosion started from under the chair and continued up from the floor toward Mr. Worley's windows. It continued past Mr. Worley and out the windows, taking the velvet curtains with it. The force of the blast instantly severed Mr. Worley's head from his neck. It wasn't a very clean cut, but it was quick and painless. The last strange feeling Mr. Worley had was the confusion of not understanding why he was suddenly looking at the building from the outside of his office window. He never heard a thing because his eardrums had disintegrated with the impact of the explosion. His body had been blown apart. Everything went dark, very dark for poor Mr. Worley. From where she sat, Maddie could only see the rush of air, flames, and debris exploding out from the office windows. She smiled and said, "Well, another 50 in the bank. Good work, Miss Maddie, if I do say so myself. Was he ever an unsuspecting jerk? This is what happens when you mess around, you ass." She placed the cellular phone back into the box along with the binoculars. She didn't worry about people seeing her. The windows were tinted, and with the sun hitting them in the morning, they became a mirror to anyone on the outside. Even a window washer couldn't see in before 10 in the morning, a perfect office location for a perfect office crime. This one was just too easy. Maddie picked up her shoulder bag, took out another cellular phone, and dialed the personnel office across the street. "Hi, this is Elizabeth Young. I wanted to come by and drop off the papers you requested yesterday." The young man on the other side of the phone was hysterical. Maddie could barely understand him. "Oh my God, how terrible," she responded. "I'll tell you what, I'll call back tomorrow, okay?" "Okay, thanks." She clicked the off button and thought, "Wonder if I still have the job." She giggled. "Well, now to pick up Toby." She grabbed the box and proceeded to the door. But first she slid the single chair to one side of the room and from the box took out a can of furniture polish and a clean cloth. She dusted the chair from top to bottom. Then, with the box, coffee, and her shoulder bag, Maddie left the room. It was fingerprint clean and evidence-free. After all, she did have a son to raise. On the way out, she said goodbye again to Jonathan, who commented on the horrible explosion across the street. She told him she would use the back entrance to avoid the fire engines and quietly exited the building. Jonathan stood watching the excitement across the street, not thinking twice about Maddie and her small box of objects.